here today. I'm Denisa. I'm currently working as a president of Erasmus Center for Entrepreneurship, but I'm also working with Leon on investment advisory in terms of clean tech energy. And also we are doing a project that is very focused on Eastern European entrepreneurship opportunities that come forth because of the energy transitioning that is happening in these countries. So it's actually quite nice to be here already today and provide with some insights on how you can actually develop such projects and what it takes to implement them in real life. Yeah. I think, Leon, maybe you can also introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Denisa. Yeah, it's very nice to be here again. I'm already working quite a while in the energy sector, and always interested in investment in this sector. And I think when we look to the renewables that are coming to the grid, that has to be developed, and developing I find the most creative part of what I've done in the energy sector. I'm happy to share some more details about that, and also feel free to approach us afterwards to really to discuss about project development and also about opportunities that you see in your region. So that's a little bit my introduction. Chinska, maybe you can take over and start the session.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot. I will then very shortly also introduce myself. My name is Chinska. I've been working for energy investment management for 2 years now, previously as an investment advisor, and right now more in the thought leadership branch that we established. And in my day-to-day work, I support most of the European Commission with advisory services in public policy, mostly related to energy and climate policies. And now I will, I think, start the session. Leon, you can go to the first slide. I'll just give a short introduction on both the team and both on the topic of today. On the last session last week, we heard a little about those value creators who will play a big role in the energy transition while also shaping their own business portfolios. And today we will talk a little bit more, as said, about the project and asset development aspects of the energy transition. You can go to the first slide, Leon. Thank you. So shortly about energy investment management, we are an investment management and advisory boutique focusing on energy transition assets and clean tech ventures. We have 3 main groups of activities. One is our advisory services related to investments in energy assets and clean tech ventures, mostly focusing on development and transactions and implementation. And then we have our thought leadership branch, which is mostly focusing on knowledge sharing and leadership in the energy transition via participating in various research projects, which we are conducting ourselves also with Denisa, programs, different networks and events. And then our third branch is, of course, investments, where we ourselves invest into clean tech ventures and different assets, structure portfolios, develop fund structures and participation concepts in the energy transition. So this would be about EIM. And the next slide. Here you can see one of our thought leadership initiatives, which is called the European Energy Transition Network East meets West, where we have about 30 young professionals sharing experiences mostly in Eastern Europe about the energy transition in their countries, and of course exchanging a lot of knowledge, attending events together, and trying to shape transition that is coming in the region. And apart from this, we also have an Indonesian network, so we have aspirations to lead the in various places of the world. Next one. Here you can see, for example, our other program, which is led by Denisa, which is called East European Energy Transition Entrepreneurial Opportunities Program. We launched this program because we want to create leadership in this East European energy transition and contribute to this whole process by not only research, but also an interview series, for example, conducted with Eastern European energy professionals, We also set up a knowledge team to support this program. We are also right now, of course, sharing our knowledge and extending our networking with the help of energy community. And going forward, we aim to produce much more research material on the transition and the opportunities in the Eastern and Southern European region, also complemented with some multimedia materials. So the cooperations we are leading right now, and some of the key aspects of the Project program will be, of course, focus firstly on business portfolio strategy. So as we already talked about, it's very talked about that last week. It's very important to know who these players are who can enter the quest for more and more renewables and manage their business portfolios in a way that they can be an important player on the markets. We will look within the program at business development accelerators to really foster this cooperation and this progress of potential enterprises and energy providers in the region. So it's not only, of course, about big utilities, but also small companies and small teams can have big success in the energy transition. And it's not only interesting for business players, but also for government and for regulators. And last but not least, of course, it's very important to understand the in-depth under the regional circumstances in depth to know what we can expect in this region in terms of market developments and other aspects that are important to accelerate the transition. So we always would like to understand the regional and local circumstances first before we look at how to do business there. Next one, please. Here you can see the 3 masterclasses that are comprising this series, this energy investment management series. Last week we had the session on energy business portfolio strategy. This week we are talking about asset project finance, asset development, and next about project finance more. And you can see here that there's also multiple other masterclasses that we are capable to give in the topics, both also for companies and individuals interested. And here I would just briefly show you a few latest developments on renewable energy growth, mostly in the EU, to see what's lying ahead. Here you can see a nice graph about how renewables have grown in the past 10 years. We can see a rapid growth in solar and wind, of course, and fossil fuels declining, which is very promising. And of course, this graph will continue to grow, especially expanding with wind and solar capacity and other renewables, hopefully after 2022. I mean, not hopefully, but certainly. Next slide, please. Here you can see the mix of the EU 27 in the past 13 months. We can see that the portfolios and the mixes are very, very diverse. There's a lot of nuclear in some countries. In other countries, there's still a huge challenge of phasing out coal and other fossil sources. And but we also see that with the green and the blue bars that the renewables and also solar is growing rapidly, and we really have to change these colors around in the following decade and then the next 20 years. Next one, please. Yes, this is also just a nice projection on how the electricity generation mix would look. This is a global view, and yeah, very, very nicely shows us the scale of the challenge that's ahead, both in development, investments, all kinds of financial flows into renewables and the changing energy mixes. Next one, please. And of course, when we're talking about asset development and project development and anywhere, it's very important to look at also the support regimes that are present in these countries and these regions, whether it is a feed-in tariff being a fixed continuous fee given for generators for a given time, or whether it's a feed-in premium, which is paid upon the market price after the energy is fed into the grid. Of course, these are both key mechanisms that are very extensively used already in many countries, and the quantity in these cases is not fixed. But in other cases, there could be a quota allocation system where it's a fixed amount of renewables distributed between different generators, or there's also auctions and tenders where it's multiple renewable technologies being supported financially by both governments and authorities in order to, of course, not only meet climate goals, but to support businesses in their journey to transforming their portfolios. And the next slide, please. So here is just a summary of what we all need to understand when it comes to energy asset development, all the circumstances that have to be taken into account, including the support regime I just talked about what kind of subsidies or financial support developers can receive, about the knowledge and experience, of course. It's very much about experienced people understanding the markets and the business to be able to set up successful businesses. It's also important to look at the permitting procedures in different countries to of course, because of financial planning and all kinds of issues that can come up while developing a project. Of course, it is needed that all the developers and the contractors are ready to take off the project and understand what's going to happen with their project in the next years. And of course, the financial and other readiness of investors and banks has to be present in order to in time finance upfront these projects and kick them off. And I believe that with this, without further delay, I will bring you the presentation from Leon about asset development, and he will expand further about all these aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cinzka. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, as just shown by Cinzka, you see looking forward, looking to 2050, for example, the next 30 years, there will be massive investments in renewable energy assets. And I always have been interested in energy investments. The first 15 years of my career was very much focused on making conventional energy cleaner. So FGD plants, waste incinerator plants, that kind of business. In the last 15 years, yeah, I spent a lot of time with wind, solar, bioenergy, hydro. So quite a wide range of renewable assets. And it's good to realize that's just the beginning. And then when you're at the early days of your career, then I think it's very promising that when you really join this energy asset development, then yeah, it can be quite interesting in different roles that you that will be in. As I already mentioned, I really like asset development. For me, it's I started my career in project realization, then moved to asset development, and after that I added financing. I've been active in asset development for 20 years. And it's really a very creative part, and I really like it because with a little amount of money you can already start developing your own solar project and bring it to a project realization. And I think that's quite something yeah, interesting when you do it in the good way. And I also call it a kind of the art of creating energy assets. It's you can say it's a kind of art, if you like. Let's go to yeah, I have myself a technical background, studied applied physics and business economics. First worked 10 years in project realization, so for me it was really almost learning a new language. And here you will find some vocabulary related to asset development and financing. I also added a link to Wikipedia. I think next week we'll spend some more time on project finance. There's maybe even more words that you're less familiar today, but it's also like learning a language. Just start and getting up to speed, start talking the new language, and then yeah, it works. It's also not rocket science, so it's I think quite a lot of practice and experience will bring you further. So let's try to do that. When you look more with the technical view, then all these type of assets, they look from a technical point of view quite diverse. When you look to a hydropower plant, to a wind plant, waste to energy, large-scale biomass. They are quite diverse. But when you take more the business perspective, and we already showed it last week, but we now go much more in detail, then it's a lot of the same. It's a kind of project entity, special purpose company. SPC stands for special purpose company. And that company that is created during that project development of such an energy asset. And there are several important contracts, agreements, documents that has to be in place to get it financed by the bank and an investor. And of course, it starts with development. So doing the development, and during the development, you most of the time you first spend time with the landlord to get the kind of land contract. You start getting your permit. After you have your permit, you can maybe arrange a subsidy feed in. And then when you have your subsidy, I think then you spend more time on your engineering, procurement, construction contract and your operation and maintenance contract. And yeah, there are some, your offtake agreement, power purchase agreement is an important one. Insurance for the operational and the building stage, and sometimes also services related to your assets. And when everything is there, yeah, then normally the bank and an investor, or yourself as an investor, will finance the project. Look to renewable energy projects that are quite popular for project finance. Most of the time for a wind project, for example, a typical division between the investment cost is 20% is coming from the investor, 80% is coming from the bank. Solar, you can even see higher ratios, like 10% from 10% equity, 90% coming from the bank. Bioenergy, maybe 30, 70. So that's a little bit, yeah, the amount of financing. Next week we will dive much more in detail in that area. It's an industry on its own, but today we really want to give you a better understanding on how to develop a project. So during that stage, different stages of development, this special purpose company will be created, and in the end it will be there before it starts construction. I think what's very important is the project life cycle of an energy asset. And today we will finance on the feasibility phase, the scoping phase and definition phase. Last week we spent some time on a portfolio strategy. And maybe in the future we like to work together with you on a realization, operational, but let's focus today on the 3 stages for development. I think feasibility is really about yeah, try to understand if there are showstoppers. Scoping is optimize business opportunities, and definition, that's really the last stage. You really define and negotiate and finalize your contract to come to a bankable project. I think the gates are very important. I once was active in Spain with a solar project, and in the last stage, just before financial close, we find out that the agreements that were made in that early stage with the landlord were not bankable. So we have to go back in time and to renegotiate these contracts. So it was quite challenging. And I think when you do it properly, you have a good gate structure, and before you go to the next phase, you also fulfill the requirements. So that's quite important. Let's look a little bit more in detail. I think last week we spoke about the portfolio strategy or the business planning aspect. These are typical activities and outcome of such a strategy. When you look to feasibility, for example, in this case, I described the feasibility for a wind project. Yeah, you start to do different activities like try to secure land positions, do a first wind resource assessment, look at your potential grid connection. It's possible to permit. What will be your technical concept? You make a kind of investment estimate, 30% accuracy. And when you want to work with partners, it's also the moment that you come to an agreement with them, initial agreement, and you prepare a potential business case. With the wind project, you know it will cost at least 3 till 6 years to develop a wind project. So yeah, I think it's very important in the beginning to also look ahead for the next years, how, for example, investment costs will develop, but also the support regime will be there, and that's quite already a challenging aspect. When you still have a project at the end of the feasibility stage, you go to the scoping phase. And here I have an example of a feasibility project I was involved in. That was quite a big biomass plant, 250 megawatt electrical. We were looking to a concept that was built in the north of Finland. So there was a kind of concept there where we have a look at, and we want to build such a concept in one of the Dutch ports in the Netherlands. And we looked at the 3 important elements, so feedstock, technology, and location. And at that time we were looking to feedstock from abroad, so wood pellets or dry wood chips. We would build it in a port so that there would be access of big ships, Panamax-sized vessels. And yeah, we were really looking to electrical output, but also to heat integration. In Finland, where we saw this concept, that was next to a big paper mill. So you saw a lot of synergy between that bioenergy concept and that paper mill next door, from a feedstock side perspective, but also from a heat integration and so on. And when we did that feasibility study for that such a project in the Netherlands, we find out quite some interesting things. So, of course, the technology was there, but it was CFB technology. But in Finland, they used, next to biomass, they also used peat and coal. And yeah, we were looking to that concept in the Netherlands, and then it was quite challenging to get it permitted. So in the end, we decided, yeah, we have to go for 100% biomass, so not a kind of mixture of conventional fuel and biomass. No, 100% biomass. And then, yeah, the technology concepts at that time, they were not that big. So there were examples of less than 50 megawatt electrical output. But yeah, we were looking to bigger than 50 megawatt electrical output. And it was quite challenging to find the right technology with a certain track record. Also look to the feedstock amounts, and yeah, to efficiency. I think bioenergy is quite an interesting concept, but it's also looked differently in different countries. Especially in the Netherlands, bioenergy at this moment is quite challenging to develop when you compare it, for example, with Scandinavian countries, but also some countries in Eastern Europe. So yeah, the outcome from that, that first feasibility for a big 250 megawatt, that was downsized to a 50 megawatt plus concept. So that was a typical feasibility research, and it was quite interesting to do that feasibility phase and then come to the conclusion that we really have to downscale the concept. So that's a typical work that you do in the feasibility phase. Scoping, I think when you look to scoping, yeah, you have a realistic project and you try to find out, are you talking about 5 wind turbines or 10 turbines? What kind of tip height, what kind of rotor diameter you're looking for? That kind of things that are typical important in your scoping phase. You spend a lot of time on your permitting. So normally scoping phase will take quite a while for a wind energy project, for example, at least I think 2 years, 2-3 years. And when you have your permit, you also know that you have a realistic project. I think when you look to wind energy, then getting your permit is maybe the most challenging part. It's quite mature technology, so there will be suppliers that can deliver the technology. And yeah, quite in some countries you get still a subsidy for wind energy. Although there are already projects realized also without subsidy. It's depending when you're at the seaside, you have of course much more wind than when you're land inwards. So that's a little bit activities that you do in that scoping phase. And at the end of the scoping phase, then you take the decision, do I bring my project to financial close with the definition phase? And I think when you look to definition phase, maybe from a time part, it's maybe shorter than that scoping phase, but it's really the nitty-gritty details in all kinds of contracts and business models and ranging financing. So there's a lot of work done in that definition phase. It's also quite expensive. I think maybe half of the development budget is spent in the definition phase, and a lot of work to be done, because after that, you have to take a final investment decision and start constructing. So everything that you can prepare before starting construction, I think you have to do very well, and that's the moment to do that in the definition phase. So I think the main elements are invitation to tender. So you select your technology supplier, prepare your financial model, start discussing with the banks for investing, do all kinds of assessments, the TAR assessments on several aspects, technology, but also risk and legal aspects. So quite a wide range of activities. And when you are successful, you reach that moment of financial close and the construction can start. And then, you're no longer in the development stage. You really have the building stage. And normally there is also a handover from the development team to the realization team, and afterwards to the operational team, where you try to support them from your development phase as much as possible for the construction and operational phase. Construction phase, I think a lot of emphasizes on health, safety, environment aspects, realization in budget, in planning, quality with a good quality, I think are important things. So that's realization phase. And operational, I think then it's a completely different phase when you look to a wind farm. Maybe in a wind farm in the operational phase is getting is much less work. It's important work to be done, but it's much less work than in the development and in the realization phase. But when you have a renewable energy assets, most of the time it will be there for 15, 20, 50 years maybe when you look to hydropower. So it's very important that you prepare well in the definition phase and in the realization phase for that long operational period. So this is the project life cycle, and here I put the requirements at the different gates. I don't want to go in every detail, but you see that at the different gates you will have criteria that you have to meet before you can go to the next phase. So here an overview, and normally senior management is taking quite some decisions, but for most projects before you start construction, there's also board approval, board decision needed. So quite some preparation also for such a board decision. And what I like very much is the value creation. As mentioned, you start more or less with nothing. You start studying, start doing investigations. You prepare your project stage by stage. And at a certain moment, you realize that you really create value, especially at gate 2, where you are almost have your permit, or you have already your permit. Then you really create a lot of value, and your cost curve and your value curve are really interesting development, and that I like most from project development. That I think the money, it's high risk game at one side, but when you do it well, I think then you can also manage these risks, but it's also creating interesting returns that you cannot create by operational assets or by realizing projects. So for that, I think it's quite an interesting area to work in. Also, as young professional, I think it's quite a dynamic teams, very diverse teams that work on these project developments. And when you do it successful and can develop your own projects, then there are also interesting opportunities for the longer term. Denisha will tell a little bit more about case studies. So Denisha.
Yeah, Leon, thank you. Well, hello again, everyone. As Leon was just saying, now we will dive a little bit deeper into some more specific cases, because one of the best ways to actually see how this whole project development goes through and how it is implemented is to actually see some examples in real life. So Leon, if you would go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the cases we're going to be talking about is the floating solar plant. It's something relatively new, and here in the Netherlands, there are very few such parks. But Leon and I had the chance to actually go to a site inspection. And as you can see, there are whole kilometers filled with solar panels on top of this body of water. So, of course, when you have such a project, it's super important to have also the community agreeing for this project to take place in this body of water, because otherwise you will be damaging the fauna and the flora of the environment as well. And sometimes also, if there are people living nearby, it's not very likely that they are going to receive this nicely. There are probably going to be some small community protests and people saying, yeah, we don't really want that here because it's not nice for us. We want to be the ones using this, and we want to have access to it rather than a company having full access to it. So we are going to talk a little bit more about this just after 2 minutes. So Leon, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so apart from the floating solar panel plants, there are a lot of new innovations that include solar panels nowadays. And here you have a few examples. For instance, this is something developed by the company Hyatt Solar. It's a flexible solar panel. And this is quite interesting because while you think of solar panels as something that you have to put on top of your roof, or the surface should be flat in order for them to be placed properly, now when you have this added flexibility, there are a lot of other opportunities that come and new places where you can put the solar panels in order to generate more energy. So this has, of course, created more opportunities for people that want to make their businesses more sustainable or want to live more sustainably in general. This is, again, the case of the solar panels, which we'll dive deeper after this slide. And another very interesting business development or business model that includes solar panels is the one developed by Solis. And, you know, nowadays there are a lot of businesses that are integrating the shared economies principles into the way that they do business. And Solis is one of these. Just like you have shared cars nowadays, like Uber, or shared apartment places like Airbnb, Solis just does this thing, but with solar panels. So you can lease solar panels from this company and use them for specific amounts of times. So this is something quite interesting, I think, as well. And apart from these, there are also other things that you can, that other developments or innovations in the solar panel side, so to say. Like, for instance, you can also charge your phone with some very small portable solar panels, and there's a lot more opportunities like this. So you just have to be on the lookout if you are interested. Leon, if you can go to the next one. So now to go, as we said before, to go a bit deeper into the specificities of how one would go to develop a floating solar panel plant. There are a lot of things to be taken into consideration, because this one, the one that we went to, was actually built on top of a body of water that was artificial. So there was no fish there. It was something that was a building site before. So that is why the water had accumulated, and they had no issues with the communities around them. But I can imagine that if someone wants to do this in a natural lake, for instance, it's going to be quite problematic, and it's also very unlikely for the project to go through. So for this, you have to be on the lookout of such places so that you don't have such environmental issues as well. In addition, we're going to talk a little bit about the technology and the design as well. It's very important to remind that this is not your usual solar panel. You are working with water now. And this brings a lot of issues because, you know, water and electricity don't really mix well. We've all learned this in elementary school. So all the materials that should be used in such projects should be of the highest quality. Probably the most expensive part should also be the cables, because you have the anchoring systems that go underneath the ground to be connected with the grid afterwards. So you have to really make sure that this don't face any issues throughout the year, because otherwise you're going to have big accidents. Apart from that, there is also the logistics. There is a specific way that you can bring the solar panels to the lake and then place them there as well. And this includes boats, small boats sometimes, sometimes digging as well, because you have to make sure also that they have a stable place to stay on. Apart from that, there is a lot of maintenance that goes into this as well, because remember, you want this project to be a long-term one. You're not putting solar panels there for 2 or 3 years. You're putting them there for 20, 25, maybe 30 years. It depends on what the lifespan of the solar panels is. So in this respect, you have to be very careful to employ the right people for this, the people that know how to perform the maintenance of these. And there is also a lot of safety requirements as well. So whenever you have people visiting, you have to make sure that you tell them that they have the proper things to wear, that you tell them where to step, because otherwise they might fall in the water. They might also break some of the devices, and then it becomes a problem with other stakeholders as well. I think, Leon, if you can go to the next one. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting case. Being from Albania myself, I'm quite familiar with this, and Leon was diving into it last week, and he said, Denisa, Albania is such a nice country to talk about the opportunities of investing in clean tech. So you can see here 2 maps. The map on the left is quite clearly the one that talks about maybe the water flows in Albania, and we already have a lot of hydropower plants, and this is where most of our energy comes from, because we have a lot of mountains, a lot of river streams. So that is something quite beneficial that the nature has offered us. But apart from that, maybe an opportunity that is not as much tapped into is the fact that we are a country that has a lot of days of sun throughout the year. And in the map on the right, you can see the irradiation of Albania. So you can see that on the very western part of Albania, the coastal part, it's orange, and then it's kind of more yellowish, but it never goes to blue, for instance. So the country is ideal for building more, for having more solar panels there. So Leon, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah. Here we can see how much of the electricity production in Albania happens through hydropower. And it's all of it. It's something that is very nice, because you have zero use of fossil fuels to produce electricity, and everyone gets their electricity from the hydropower plant. But however, you can also see there is a lot of fluctuations on the graph. And these fluctuations are because you cannot rely on nature for an optimal supply of water every year. There are some years that are going to be very damp or dry, and with the case of global warming as well, it's very likely that this dampness and dryness is going to continue. So hydropower is also very volatile in nature. You can't 100% rely on it all the time. While it's super efficient for Albania because there are a lot of river streams, that might change in the future with global warming maybe becoming worse than it is right now. So this is another reason why tapping into the solar panel plants market would be very beneficial for a country such as Albania. Leon, if you can continue. Yeah. So we are going to now talk a little bit about the projects and how these hydropower projects are developed. And again, we run the risk of being not environmentally friendly or sustainable while developing the project. And this is because there is a lot of people that live in these areas from time to time, and that are located there. So whenever the government or a company decides to do such a project, they have to take into account the dislocation or relocation of the people there. So they have to also provide them with stable houses for the future or for the upcoming years. And this is always something that brings a lot of conflict, and this is also one of the reasons why some projects, including hydropower plants, don't go through. But we're still going to talk about it. We're still going to see what is important and what is on the checklist when you are working on a project that considers the building of a hydropower plant. Leon, if you can continue. Yeah, thank you. So the first one would be to investigate the internal rate of return, or the IRR. This is, of course, like one of the most important financial aspects, because you want to see how beneficial it's going to be in the future. And in order to have a better forecast, one of the methods that can be used would be to do the best and worst case scenario analysis, in which, in the best case, you kind of take into account that you have received the sufficient funding from the organizations that you have applied for funding to, or from whoever is funding this project, even if it is your own company, for instance. And then in the worst case scenario, you're going to see how this project would turn out if you don't really receive sufficient funding, and if everything is at its worst. So this is quite a nice thing that is used widely by a lot of organizations and businesses, and it's quite nice to see how it's going to work in the future. Apart from that, you also have to take into account the hydro concept and resources. So are these resources available throughout all the year? Is this water flowing in this area throughout all the year? Because, for instance, if the summer is very dry, then some rivers even go distinct. You can't really see them anymore, and then they return in winter. So that is also something that you have to account for, because the demand for energy is not seasonal, but then the supply of water sometimes can be seasonal, and that's when you run into problems. Then, of course, you have to look for the site and the right permits from the government, or maybe from the owners of the place. And this is something that will take a lot of time and needs a lot of dedication. And also, when you do the application project, you have to explain why this site would be the one for this project. Why can you not do it in another site? And then we have the organization and the stakeholders, in case you want to collaborate with other organizations, in case you want to include other countries as well, or if you're working with the European Union for this, because a lot of the projects in the developing countries work with the European Union. So this is also the part where you want to find the right stakeholders and make sure that they are completely on board with what you're doing. Apart from that, we have the asset development and production, and this is the phase where you actually get to work after you have insured the contracts, and you know that this plan is going through. Only then you can start with the asset development and production, and this needs a lot of monitoring, of course, and a lot of review. So some systems should be put in place while this is happening. Then, of course, we have a little bit of the external factors, so the market outlook and the regulations. What are the regulations in the country that this is being applied to? Does it run any political risk? And yeah, it's very important, to also make sure that you that these projects are not corrupt in any way, shape, or form. Then we move on to the contracts and the supply chain. And finally, you have the finance and the risks. And sometimes, in investment, we always have the saying that the higher the risk, the higher the returns. And that's often the case here as well. So as long as you're there, as long as the project goes through, taking into account all the risk, is very likely that they're also going to generate a lot of income for the upcoming years. Yeah, so this is what we had prepared for you today. Now we are going to move on to the Q&A session, and please ask us any burning questions that you have.